She walked into that bakery with $2 in her pocket and the ruins of a $10 million empire behind her. No one recognized her. No one was supposed to. The woman who had once graced the cover of Business Quarterly was standing in line behind a 7-year-old girl, trying to figure out if she could afford the single cupcake on the bottom shelf, the one with the smeared frosting that nobody else wanted. She couldn't. And that was the moment Sophia Bennett understood, with a clarity that nearly broke her, exactly how far she had fallen. If you've ever had to start over with nothing, or if you're afraid you might have to someday, stay until the end of this story. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bakery was called Crumbs & Co., and it smelled the way childhood memories are supposed to smell. Warm butter, sugar browning at the edges, something with vanilla that lingered long after you stopped noticing it. It was the kind of place that made people slow down involuntarily, that made strangers smile at each other for no reason, that made the ugliness outside feel temporarily manageable. Sophia noticed none of that. She noticed the price tags. She stood just inside the entrance, still wearing the gray blazer she'd had on since 6 that morning, the one she'd put on out of habit, out of some stubborn, stupid refusal to fully admit what her days had become. And she scanned the glass display case with the focused, joyless calculation of someone running numbers in her head and coming up short every single time. The birthday cakes were on the right side of the case, 3 tiers high, displayed under warm lighting that made them look like they belonged in a magazine. The smallest one, a 6-inch round, white frosting, a few decorative dots along the edge, had a small card propped against it. $18.50. She had $2.11. She'd counted it twice in the car, then once more in the parking lot, standing next to the 10-year-old Honda Civic she'd bought off Craigslist 6 weeks ago for $1,200, which represented the last actual transaction in her life that had felt like a decision rather than a surrender. She'd spread the bills and coins across her palm and looked at them the way you look at something that should be more than it is. $2.11. On her birthday. She was 30 years old today. Sophia moved to the left side of the display case, where the individual pastries were. Muffins. Croissants. A few lonely-looking Danish that had probably been there since morning. The cheapest thing in the entire case was a single chocolate chip cookie, $2.25. And that was close enough that it felt almost like a joke. A very specific, very personal joke that the universe had constructed just for her. She straightened, adjusted her blazer, told herself she wasn't going to stand here and cry in a bakery over a cookie she couldn't afford, because that was a level of pathos she refused to reach. She had a limit. She'd already crossed a lot of lines in the past 8 months, but she still had some lines. She'd buy a cup of coffee, just the drip coffee, which was $1.75, and she'd sit for a few minutes, and then she'd go back to the studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a small table, and she'd figure out what she was doing with the rest of her life, or at least the rest of her evening, starting small. "Excuse me." The voice at the counter was young and female and extremely certain of itself. "Do you have the strawberry one? The one with the flower on it?" Sophia glanced sideways. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, was pressed against the glass display case with both hands flat on it, leaving small, foggy prints, peering down at the cakes with an intensity that suggested this was the most serious decision she'd made all week. She had dark brown hair and 2 uneven pigtails, the kind of pigtails that an adult had attempted without a mirror, and she was wearing a green jacket with a small embroidered dinosaur on the collar. "Lily," a man's voice, lower, a few feet back. "Hands off the glass." The girl, Lily, pulled her hands back and looked over her shoulder at him, completely unabashed. "I'm just looking." "You're also leaving fingerprints." "They can clean it." The man came up beside her. He was tall, mid-30s, with the kind of face that looked like it had seen better days and made peace with that. Not handsome in any effortless way. His jaw was a little too sharp. There were shadows under his eyes that weren't going anywhere, and his dark blue jacket had a small paint stain near the left cuff that he'd clearly stopped trying to hide. He put a hand on the girl's shoulder in that practiced, automatic way that parents develop. Not a correction, just a presence. He glanced at Sophia the way you glance at a stranger, quick and polite and entirely non-invasive, and then looked back at the display case. Sophia ordered her coffee, paid with the crumpled dollar bill and the coins she'd arranged in her palm. Got 47 cents back, which she dropped into the tip jar because that felt like the last dignified thing she could do with it. She found a table in the corner and sat down. The coffee was good, genuinely good, dark and slightly bitter in a way that felt honest, not affected. She wrapped both hands around the paper cup and let herself have just this one thing, just this. Warm coffee on a cold November evening, in a bakery that smelled like butter and vanilla, in a city that no longer knew her name, on her birthday. 30 years old. She thought about where she'd been a year ago, then decided that was a bad idea and stopped. 8 months earlier, Sophia had been the CEO of Altara Group, a mid-sized firm she'd built from a marketing consultancy into a full-spectrum business development company over the course of 6 years. At its peak, Altara had 23 employees, offices in 2 cities, and contracts with 11 corporate clients, including 2 Fortune 500 accounts that she'd landed personally on the strength of decks she'd built herself at midnight and pitches she'd walked into on 4 hours of sleep. She had not come from money. She wanted to be clear about that. In her own mind, in the private autobiography she'd been narrating to herself since she was 19, she had built this. Her mother worked in hospital billing. Her father left when she was 11. She'd put herself through college on a combination of academic scholarships and weekend waitress shifts, graduated with a finance degree and a chip on her shoulder the size of a city block, and spent her 20s accumulating competence the hard way. By 28, she had investors. By 29, she had a board. By 30, by 30, she was sitting in a bakery with 47 cents in her wallet. The board. That's where it started. Or more precisely, Marcus Vail, her co-founder, her CFO, the man she had trusted with everything because she'd had no reason not to for 6 years. He had a handshake like a senator and a memory for names that made every client feel like the only client. He was 15 years older than her, had come from actual money, and had chosen to build something with her from scratch, which she'd always considered a kind of endorsement. She had been wrong about a lot of things. Marcus was near the top of the list. He hadn't stolen from her. It was subtler than that, and somehow worse. Over the course of 18 months, he had been quietly building relationships with Altara's 3 largest clients, not in his capacity as CFO, but personally, as a prospective partner in a venture he was assembling on the side. By the time Sophia became aware of it, 2 of those clients had already agreed to follow Marcus when he left. The third was undecided. The board, 4 of whose 5 members Marcus had personally recruited, voted to remove her as CEO in February. The stated reason was strategic misalignment. The real reason was that the company was now worth more to Marcus without her than with her. She could have fought it. She had a lawyer who told her she had a case, a real one, not a consolation. But fighting it would take 18 months and $120,000 minimum, and she had neither. By the time the vote happened, Altara had already lost 2 of its anchor contracts, which had triggered default clauses in her personal loan guarantees, which meant that the bank, polite, impersonal, immovable, was now in possession of most of what she owned. She kept the car. She kept her clothes. She kept the laptop and a hard drive full of work she'd done, and a reputation that was, at present, somewhere between uncertain and damaged goods. She moved into the studio apartment in March. She'd been there 8 months. "Daddy!" Sophia heard the word from across the bakery, low and urgent. She looked up reflexively, years of training her attention on tone, and saw the little girl, Lily, standing beside the table nearest the window, looking at her father with the kind of expression children get when they've decided something is wrong with the world and someone needs to fix it. What? The man, the father, was studying the menu board above the counter. "That lady is having birthday cake all by herself." A pause. "What lady?" "The one over there." A pause where Sophia could only assume Lily was pointing directly at her, with no hesitation whatsoever. She told the lady at the counter it was her birthday when she asked why she looked sad. Sophia had not said that. She had not said anything to the woman at the counter. She wasn't sure where Lily had gotten this information, but she had the sudden distinct sense that she was about to become part of a situation she had not consented to. "Lily, she doesn't have any cake, though. She just has coffee." People can celebrate birthdays however they want. But it's sad. It's not. It's their business, okay? We don't... I want to give her some of ours. There was a longer pause. Sophia stared very intently at her coffee cup. Lily. The father's voice was quiet but direct. She might not want that. But what if she does? Then she'll say so. She won't because she doesn't know we have cake yet. Sophia heard footsteps. Small ones. Fast, crossing the bakery floor with complete confidence. She looked up. Lily was standing 2 feet away from her table, hands clasped in front of her, looking at Sophia with large dark eyes that contained, as far as Sophia could tell, absolutely no shyness whatsoever. The dinosaur on her jacket collar was grinning. "Hi," Lily said. "Is it your birthday?" Sophia opened her mouth, closed it, tried to remember how to speak to a 7-year-old. "It is," she said, because there was no reason to lie to a child, and she was too tired for even that. "We're getting a cake." Lily said this as if it were the obvious solution to an obvious problem. "You should have some." "I'm okay, really. Dad." Lily turned without waiting for Sophia to finish. She said yes. She didn't say, but Lily was already heading back toward the counter. The father looked at Sophia across the bakery. His expression was a very specific mixture of apologetic and resigned, the expression of a man who had been in this position before and had learned at considerable cost that fighting it was not worth the energy. "I'm sorry," he said, moving toward her table. "She does this. I'm working on it." "She's fine," Sophia said, honestly surprised to find that she meant it. "She's very relentless? I was going to say decisive." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Not yet. "That's a generous interpretation." He extended a hand. Ethan Walker. Sophia Bennett." He pulled out the chair across from her and looked at it, then at her. A question without words. She nodded. He sat. The cake Lily chose was a small lemon yellow, round with white frosting, and 3 daisies piped along the top in pale green. It cost $22. Ethan paid for it without comment, and the woman behind the counter brought it to their table with a single candle already stuck in the center, unlit, which Lily immediately tried to light with her fingers before Ethan quietly intercepted. "You have to make a wish," Lily informed Sophia, very seriously, while Ethan produced a lighter from his jacket pocket. The kind of detail, Sophia would think about later, that told you something about a person's actual life. The fact that a single father carried a lighter not because he smoked, but because there were always birthday candles, always little emergencies, always some small thing that needed to be managed with tools he kept close. "I know," Sophia said. "But you have to mean it." Lily's voice had dropped, ceremonial. "Otherwise it doesn't count." "Does it count either way, really?" Lily's expression suggested this was a deeply irresponsible thing to say. "Yes." Ethan lit the candle. The small flame straightened, steady in the still air of the bakery. Sophia looked at it. She thought about what she would have wished for a year ago. The things she'd wanted, the metrics she'd been chasing, the version of success she'd built her entire adult life around. She thought about what those things had been worth in the end. She thought about the $1.75 drip coffee and the 47 cents, and the lawyer's voice on the phone saying, "You have a real case, Sophia, but it will cost you." She blew the candle out. She didn't say what she'd wished for. She wasn't entirely sure what it had been. Something quiet. Something that didn't have a price attached to it. "Good one," Lily said approvingly, settling back into her chair with the air of someone who had overseen this process professionally. Ethan cut 3 slices. They were uneven. He was not a cake cutter by training, and Lily immediately pointed out that hers was smaller than Sophia's, which led to a brief, patient renegotiation. And then they ate cake. It was a Thursday evening in November. The bakery had 3 other customers, none of whom were paying attention to them. The light through the front window was the particular dark blue of early winter nightfall, and the Christmas decorations that hadn't quite been fully installed yet gave the room an in-between feeling, half one season and half another. Sophia ate her slice and listened to Lily explain, in meticulous detail, the plot of a book she was currently reading about a girl who discovers she can communicate with horses. Ethan interjected occasionally to correct factual errors and was immediately overruled. Sophia found herself asking questions, actual questions, not the social performance of asking questions, and getting answers that were detailed and confident and often went sideways in directions she hadn't anticipated. 40 minutes passed before she noticed. Then another 20. When she finally looked at her phone, it was 7:15, and she had been sitting in this bakery for almost 90 minutes, and something about that, The specific gap between how much time had passed and how little of it had felt like an obligation, caught in her chest like a hook. "We should go," Ethan said, looking at Lily. "It's a school night." "It's only 7. 70:30, he said, which was apparently a significant number in their private system, because Lily stopped arguing and began gathering her jacket with only mild theatrical suffering. Sophia started to reach for her wallet, and Ethan shook his head before she could get there. "It's your birthday," he said, simply. Like that was the whole answer. She wanted to argue. The thing in her chest that had been in charge of self-sufficiency for 30 years wanted very badly to argue. But it also felt like arguing would be the wrong kind of thing to do, like turning down something that was actually being offered rather than just performed. "Thank you," she said. "Thank Lily." This was her idea. Lily, pulling her jacket on, overheard this and looked extremely satisfied. They walked out together. The cold hit immediately. Real November cold, with the beginning of wind. Ethan's car was parked 2 spaces down from Sophia's. When Lily saw the older Civic, she looked at it with the open curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to pretend not to notice things, and Sophia braced. "Is that your car?" "It is." "Does the heat work?" "Lily," Ethan said, "I'm just asking." "The heat works," Sophia said. "It takes a few minutes, but it works." Lily accepted this. "Okay." She turned to Sophia with the complete directness that was apparently just her default setting. "Will you come back?" "Come back?" "To the bakery, or wherever. Dad and I come here every Thursday." She said this as if she were issuing an invitation to a standing appointment and fully expected it to be accepted. Sophia looked at Ethan. He looked back at her with the expression of someone who had given up trying to moderate his daughter's ambitions and was now simply witnessing them. "Maybe," Sophia said. Lily studied her face for a moment, appeared to find this acceptable, and got in the car. Ethan opened his driver's side door and paused. "Happy birthday, Sophia." She stood in the parking lot and watched them go, the cold working through her jacket, and thought about how strange it was, how genuinely disorienting strange, that the worst birthday of her adult life had somewhere in the last hour and a half quietly stopped being the worst anything. She got in her own car. The heat took 4 minutes to start working. She sat with her hands on the wheel and looked at the front window of the bakery, where the warm light was still visible, and thought about the lemon cake with the daisies, and the uneven slices, and the candle her wish had gone into, and what she'd actually wished for when it came down to it. She'd wished, she realized, for exactly this. Not for the company back. Not for Marcus Vail to get what he deserved. Not for the investors, or the contracts, or the corner office, or any of the things she'd spent a decade building her identity around. She'd wished to feel, just for a moment, like a person who belonged somewhere. And for 75 minutes in a bakery that smelled like butter and vanilla, she had. She put the car in reverse, checked her mirrors, started driving back toward the studio apartment and the life she was going to have to figure out how to rebuild, one day at a time, from whatever she had left. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know if she'd go back on Thursday. She didn't know if she was capable of what the next year was going to require of her. But somewhere underneath all of it, in the place where the thing she'd wished for had landed, something that had been locked up for 8 months had shifted. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was smaller than that, more specific. It was just the possibility of it. And she drove home with one hand on the wheel and the city lights coming in through the windshield, and that was enough. For tonight, it was enough. She went back the following Thursday. She told herself she was going because the coffee was good. That was the story she gave herself during the drive over, during the 4 minutes it took the heat to start working, during the walk from the parking lot to the front door of Crumbs & Co. She was going because it was a decent cup of drip coffee, and she'd been making instant in her apartment for 6 weeks, and that had started to feel like a metaphor she wasn't willing to live inside anymore. That was the story. Lily and Ethan were already there when she arrived. Lily was sitting across from her father at the window table, coloring something in a sketchbook with a concentration that made her look like she was diffusing a device. Ethan had a mug of coffee and a folded newspaper on the table in front of him that he didn't appear to be reading. I was watching Lily color with the kind of low-grade attentiveness that parents develop, not hovering, not disengaged, just present in that steady background way. He looked up when the door opened. Something in his posture changed slightly, not in a dramatic way, just a small adjustment, the way a room changes when a window opens. You came back, he said. You seem surprised. A little. Lily looked up. Her face broke into a grin that was completely unguarded. I told him you would, she announced. Then she went back to coloring. Sophia sat down. That was how it started. Not with a plan, not with any of them deciding anything. Just a Thursday evening in a bakery, 3 people at a window table, and the particular quiet that happens when nobody is performing anything for anybody else. She ordered the drip coffee again. Ethan got a refill. Lily, when she finished whatever she was working on, turned the sketchbook around to show them both. It was a drawing of 3 people sitting at a table, rendered in crayon with the specific aesthetic choices of a 7-year-old, which meant everyone had round heads and the table was floating slightly. One of the figures had yellow hair, one had brown hair pulled back. One was small, with 2 bumps at the top of her head. That's us, Lily said, in case there was any ambiguity. Ethan looked at it for a moment. Why do I have a square nose? That's what your nose looks like. It really doesn't. In my drawing it does. Sophia laughed. It came out louder than she expected, catching her off guard, and she put a hand over her mouth for a second. Not embarrassed exactly, just surprised at herself. She hadn't laughed like that specific involuntary kind, in longer than she could accurately remember. Ethan looked at her. He didn't say anything, but the corner of his mouth turned up, and that was enough. The Thursday after that, she came back again. And the one after that. It was not a scheduled thing. Nobody texted ahead, nobody confirmed. It simply became, through repetition and the particular inertia of small good habits, the structure of her week. Thursday evening, 6 o'clock, crumbs and carbohydrate. Window table if it was open, the table by the pastry case if it wasn't. November turned into December. The bakery put up a small Christmas tree near the entrance with lights that blinked in no discernible pattern. Lily spent 3 consecutive Thursdays attempting to convince her father that a dog would improve their quality of life substantially. Ethan explained with patient consistency that they lived in a second-floor apartment with no yard. Lily countered that dogs didn't need yards, they needed love. Ethan said that was a very nice sentiment that did not address the reality of walking a dog in January at 5 in the morning. Sophia mostly listened to these exchanges the way you listen to good radio, not involved, but genuinely entertained and grateful for the noise. She was during this period making very slow progress on everything else. She'd gotten one freelance contract in October, a small local company that needed a marketing audit, paid $1,100, took her 3 weeks to complete. She'd gotten a second one in November, larger, a regional logistics firm that needed a growth strategy assessment. That one paid $4,000, which covered rent for 3 months, and gave her enough breathing room that she could, temporarily, stop doing the math in her head every time she bought groceries. She was applying for other things too, positions at firms she'd once been too senior for. She sent applications without putting Altara Group on the resume in a way that would require explanation, which meant she was essentially presenting herself as someone with no recent history, which was a strange thing to be when you were 30 and had spent the previous 6 years of your life building something. She went on 2 interviews. One was for a director-level role at a consulting firm downtown. She'd had the interview, thought it had gone reasonably well, and then heard nothing for 3 weeks, and then a form rejection. The second was a phone screen that ended when the interviewer Googled her mid-call. She could hear the pause, the shift in tone, and asked delicately about some reports regarding her departure from her previous company. She'd handled it with as much composure as she had available. Then she'd sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes afterward and stared at the concrete wall in front of her. She didn't tell Ethan any of this on those Thursday evenings, because it wasn't what those evenings were for, or at least that was what she told herself. The real reason, the one she wasn't being entirely honest about, was that she didn't want to be the person she'd become in any room where she also got to be something else. It was the second Thursday of December when Lily asked about her job. They'd been talking about school. Lily's class was doing a winter project, something about ecosystems, and Lily had decided her ecosystem was going to be the deep ocean because, in her assessment, most kids were going to pick forests or meadows, and the deep ocean had more interesting stuff that could kill you. Ethan had expressed some reservations about this framing. Lily had dismissed them. Then, with no transition whatsoever, "What do you do for work?" Sophia looked up from her coffee. "Right now?" "Yeah. Consulting." She kept her voice level. I help businesses figure out how to run better. Like a doctor, but for companies? Yeah, actually, that's not a bad way to put it. Lily seemed to find this acceptable. My dad fixes houses, she said, with the satisfied tone of someone completing a list. He's good at it. He fixed Mrs. Petrova's whole bathroom by himself. The tile took 3 weekends, Ethan said, with an expression that suggested the tile had been a personal adversary. But it looks good now. It looks fine. Mrs. Petrova said it looked amazing. Mrs. Petrova is extremely polite. Sophia watched him say this, the flatness of it, the specific combination of self-deprecation and genuine pride that he was clearly trying to keep from being visible. She thought about the paint stain on his jacket that was still there. Different jacket now, but similar stain, which told her something about how his days were structured, how much of himself he put into the physical work, how little room there was in a life like his for the kind of image management she'd spent years treating as essential. There was something clarifying about that. She wasn't sure what to do with the feeling yet, but it was there. How long have you been doing it? She asked. The home repair. 7 years. Started when... He paused, a small pause, recalibrating. After my wife died, I needed something I could do with flexible hours. Be home when Lily got out of school, that kind of thing. He said it with the practiced evenness of someone who had delivered this information enough times that the delivery was under control, even when the information itself wasn't. But there was still something underneath it that didn't quite make it all the way to casual. I'm sorry, Sophia said. It was a long time ago. Then, after a beat, it was 4 years ago, so, not that long. Lily was coloring again, or pretending to. Her hand wasn't moving the same way. She was listening. She was always listening. Lily was 3, Ethan said, quieter. She doesn't really... He stopped, tried again. She knows, obviously. We talk about it. But she doesn't have a lot of memories from before. She has the photos, Lily said, without looking up from the sketchbook, and the video of her birthday. Ethan looked at his daughter for a moment with an expression that Sophia wasn't sure she was supposed to see, the kind of expression that only exists for a second before it gets managed. Yeah, he said, she has those. The table was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, just real. The kind of quiet that happens when something true has been said and nobody feels the need to paper over it immediately. I lost my company this year, Sophia said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way certain things come out when you're in a room where pretending costs more than it's worth. A co-founder pushed me out, took the clients, took the board. I had personal guarantees on the business loan, so when the contracts collapsed, I lost most of everything. Ethan looked at her steadily. Not with pity, which she'd been braced for. Not with the particular expression people get when a downfall confirms something they secretly suspected. Just listening. That's why the consulting is slow right now, she said. My name is attached to a story that makes people nervous. I'm basically starting from scratch. How far from scratch? Pretty far. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I have 2 clients. One of them I found through a connection who didn't know what happened. The other one found me through a blog post I wrote in September when I was trying to figure out what to do with myself. She paused. And I had 2011 the night you met me. Something passed across his face. Not surprise exactly. Maybe more like recognition, a piece of something clicking into a space that had been empty. He nodded slowly. The consulting is going to be a long road, she said. I know that. She stopped, looked at the table. I haven't actually said any of this to anyone. I didn't realize I needed to. You don't have to explain it to me, Ethan said. I know. That's why I could. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my first year after Claire died, I didn't tell anyone how bad it was either. Not really. People ask how you're doing, and they want a specific answer. They want better, thanks, or taking it one day at a time, or something that lets everyone go back to normal. Nobody actually wants to hear the real number. The real number, she repeated. Like, if someone asks how you're doing, and the honest answer is 6 out of 10, you say 8, because 6 is too much information. What's your current number? He thought about it, genuinely considered. 7? Maybe 7.5 on good days. She nodded. I'm at a 4, working toward 5. That's honest. You said you wanted honest. I did. He picked up his coffee. 4 is workable. 4 means you're still doing the math. Christmas came and went. Sophia spent it alone, which she had prepared for and found was still harder than the preparation had made it feel. She cooked a real meal, an actual roast chicken, vegetables, the works, because the alternative was takeout, and she'd decided some time ago that small domestic dignities were one of the things keeping her from a version of herself she didn't want to become. She ate at the small table in her studio apartment with a glass of wine and a book she'd been meaning to read for 2 years, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. Not good, not bad, just a day at the end of a year that had been, by any honest accounting, the hardest of her life. She thought about Ethan and Lily. Wondered what their Christmas looked like. Whether Lily had opened presents with the same relentless forensic enthusiasm she brought to everything else. Whether Ethan had a family he went to, or whether it was just the two of them. She realized she didn't actually know that. She knew the things he'd told her and the things she'd inferred, but there was a whole geography of his actual life that she hadn't mapped yet. She caught herself thinking about the distinction between the two. Things he'd told her and things she'd inferred, and recognized that the fact she was making that distinction at all was probably information about something. She put the book down, drank the wine, went to sleep. January was cold in a way that was physically discouraging, the kind of cold that made even small distances feel like decisions. Sophia's morning runs, which she'd been doing since September as a way of maintaining the fiction that she was a person with structure, required approximately 15 minutes of pre-departure negotiation with herself. She always went, but she always argued about it first. The Thursday meetings continued. They'd settled by now into something with texture. Sophia knew that Ethan took his coffee with 1 sugar and that he'd gotten into the habit of black in his 20s and added the sugar back in his 30s and mildly resented this. She knew that Lily was afraid of moths specifically, not insects generally, because moths were, in Lily's assessment, trying to be butterflies, but they made some bad choices. She knew that Ethan's home repair business had 3 regular clients and that he'd been thinking about trying to grow it but hadn't done anything about it. And when she'd asked why, he'd said, "I don't know how to market myself," with the discomfort of someone admitting a gap they hadn't wanted to quantify. She'd let that sit for 2 weeks. Then on the 3rd week, she'd brought him a 2-page document. "What is this?" he said, looking at it. "It's a basic marketing framework for a service business at your scale. Mostly about how to position your referral network and set up a simple online presence. It took me about an hour." He looked at the document, then at her. "You didn't have to do this. I know. But you've been saying you want to grow the business for 6 weeks, and every time I ask what's stopping you, you say you don't know how to market yourself. So." She pushed the coffee cup to the side to give him more table space. "Page 1 is infrastructure, what you actually need to set up, in order. Page 2 is messaging, how to describe what you do in a way that makes the right clients call you instead of the wrong ones." He read through it. Lily, sitting across from him, leaned over and examined it upside down. "Is that about your business?" she asked. "Apparently. Are you going to do it?" "I'm reading it." "That means yes," Lily told Sophia confidently. Ethan looked up from the document. There was something in his face that was hard to read. Not discomfort, something more complicated. "This is what you do," he said, "the consulting. Essentially. I can't pay you for this. I didn't give it to you as a client. I gave it to you as a—" She stopped, chose the word deliberately. "Friend." He held that for a moment. Then he nodded once and went back to reading. It was such a small thing. 2 pages. An hour of her time, the most basic application of skills she'd been using professionally for a decade. But something about doing it, about having someone in front of her who actually needed exactly what she knew how to give, and being able to just give it, without a pitch or a proposal or a scope of work or any of the apparatus she'd spent years building around the actual thing, felt unexpectedly solid, like finding something in a pocket she'd forgotten she had. He called her on a Wednesday in late January. Not a text. An actual call, which felt slightly formal between them by now, which made her pick up on the second ring. "Hey. Hey." A pause. "I did the thing, the marketing thing. Set up the page, sent emails to the 3 clients I have asking for referrals the way you described. And? I have 2 new inquiries. One of them is a bigger job than anything I've done before. Full kitchen renovation, not just repairs. The other is a property manager with multiple units." She sat back in her chair. "That's good. That's actually really good, Ethan. Yeah. He sounded like someone who had gotten a better result than he'd let himself expect, and wasn't quite sure what to do with it. I wanted to say thank you. You don't have to call to say thank you. I know. A beat. I wanted to. She didn't know what to do with that exactly. It landed somewhere that wasn't quite her chest and wasn't quite her stomach, and she was aware, in the way she'd become aware of a handful of things over the past few weeks, that she was paying more attention to where things landed when it came to Ethan than she was entirely comfortable examining. Are you going to take the kitchen renovation? She asked. I think so. It's a stretch, but I've done the components separately. I've just never done them all at once. Do you want to talk through it? The scope, the timeline. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Do you want to? A pause. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that would be helpful. They talked for 40 minutes. She asked questions she'd learned to ask about the client's actual priorities versus stated priorities, about margin, about what happens when something goes wrong mid-project and the client changes their mind. He answered carefully, thinking through things he'd probably handled on instinct before and was now being asked to articulate. When they hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. She thought about what it meant that she'd just spent 40 minutes helping someone plan a kitchen renovation, and that it had been, honestly, the most useful she'd felt in months. Not because kitchen renovations were her field, but because the skills were the skills. And for 40 minutes she'd been completely in them, not thinking about Marcus Vail or the board vote or the form rejection email or any of the other things that lived in the background of every day like low-grade weather. She set this phone down, looked at the desk in front of her, the laptop, the spreadsheet she'd been building for her next client proposal. She'd been trying, for months, to figure out how to rebuild something. She kept thinking of it as reconstruction, putting the same thing back together from different materials, trying to get back to what had existed before. But sitting in her apartment at 8 in the evening, having just talked someone through a project plan for a kitchen renovation, she thought, maybe that wasn't the right model. Maybe she wasn't trying to rebuild Altara. Maybe she was trying to build something she didn't have a blueprint for yet. That was scarier in some ways. But it was also, she thought, more honest. February moved slowly. The cold held, Lily's Deep Ocean Ecosystem project was submitted and received a grade that Lily described as really good, but the teacher said I made the anglerfish too scary, which Lily considered a badge of distinction rather than a criticism. Sophia had 3 clients now, small, all of them, nothing that would have registered as significant by Altara standards. But she was building processes, the way she billed, the way she scoped work, the way she set expectations with clients who'd never worked with an independent consultant before and needed more hand-holding than they'd anticipated. She was rebuilding the infrastructure of professional competence from the ground up, which was humbling in a very specific way. She knew exactly what she was doing and why it mattered, and she was doing it at a scale that would have embarrassed her 2 years ago. She let herself feel both of those things at once, the competence and the smallness of it. She was learning to hold contradictions without needing to resolve them immediately, which was, she was starting to understand, maybe the actual skill that the last year had been trying to teach her. She and Ethan fell into a pattern of calls between Thursdays. Not every day, not even every other day, but regular enough that it had its own rhythm. They talked about his projects and her clients and Lily's various ongoing feuds with the world's inconveniences. They talked about their weeks, the way people talk when the conversation isn't going anywhere in particular, and that's fine. One night in late February, it was late and she was tired and she said something that surprised her. I think I'm starting to figure out what I'm actually good at, not just what I'm skilled at, what I'm actually good at. Is there a difference? He asked. Yeah, skilled is just practice, repetition. Good at is different. Good at means when you're doing it, something fits, like the work fits the shape of you. A pause. What's the difference for you? She thought about it. I'm skilled at a lot of things Altara required. The fundraising, the investor relations, the board management. I was good at those because I worked at them. She looked at the ceiling. But what I'm actually good at, what fits, is being in the room with someone who's trying to build something and helping them see what they can't see. The problems under the problems, the things they're avoiding. That's what you did for me, he said. 2 pages, she said. It wasn't the 2 pages. It was the conversation after. when you asked why I hadn't done anything about growing the business for 2 years. A pause. Nobody had asked me that before. They just accepted the answer. She stared at the ceiling. What was the answer? She asked. The real one. A long pause. Long enough that she thought maybe she'd pushed too far, gone past the place where he was willing to go. I didn't want the business to grow, he said finally. If it grew, I'd have to manage people, hire somebody, and that meant it would take more of me, and I already didn't have enough of me to go around. I needed to be there, and the business was small enough that I could do it all myself and still be home by 4. He exhaled. But she's 7 now. She doesn't need me there at 4 the same way she did at 3. So you're allowed to want more now? Another pause. Yeah, I think so. I'm still figuring out if I actually believe that. She didn't say anything for a moment because some things you hear, and the only right response is to let them exist without immediately covering them with words. You're allowed to want more, she said again, quieter. He didn't answer, but he didn't change the subject either. They stayed on the phone for another half hour, talking about nothing much, until she fell asleep mid-sentence somewhere around 11:30 and woke up 20 minutes later with her cheek on the phone and the call still connected. She looked at the screen. He'd stayed on. She hung up and lay in the dark of her studio apartment and listened to the city outside and thought about what it meant. That a man she'd met in a bakery 4 months ago over a piece of lemon cake had become, without either of them deciding it, one of the most honest conversations she had. She didn't do anything with that thought. She just held it. Outside, the last of February pushed against the windows. Spring was still somewhere on the other side of a few more hard weeks. Not visible yet, but there. The way things that are coming are always there before you can see them, moving through the dark toward wherever you are. March arrived the way it always does in the Northeast. Not cleanly, not with any of the decisive energy the calendar implies, but grudgingly, in fits. A warm day followed by 3 cold ones. Rain that couldn't decide if it wanted to be sleet. The city in that particular in-between state where winter hasn't finished and spring hasn't committed, and everything looks slightly exhausted by the ambiguity. Sophia noticed it on her morning runs. The light was different, earlier now, lasting longer at the edges of the day, changing the quality of the air in a way that was subtle but cumulative. She'd been running the same 2-mile loop since October, past the same shuttered coffee cart and the same row of brownstones and the same corner with the broken streetlight that the city had not gotten around to fixing. She knew the loop the way you know a thing you've repeated enough times that it stops being experienced and starts being inhabited. But the light was changing, and that made the familiar strange again, which was either a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you were running from. She was running from less, she thought. That was something. She had 4 clients now. The 4th had come through a referral from the logistics firm, a small manufacturing company outside the city that needed someone to assess why their operations kept stalling at the same point in the production cycle. She'd gone out there on a Tuesday in early March, driven 40 minutes on a gray highway with coffee in the cup holder, walked the floor with the operations manager, asked the questions she'd learned to ask, and identified within the first 2 hours that the stall point wasn't a process problem. It was a personnel problem. A single bottleneck created by the fact that 2 department heads refused to communicate directly, and everyone below them had adapted around the dysfunction so thoroughly that nobody could see it anymore. She'd written up a 12-page analysis and a remediation plan over the following week. The operations manager had looked at it and said, with the particular expression of someone who has been told an uncomfortable truth they already suspected, "We've known something was wrong. We just couldn't find it." That's usually how it works, Sophia had said. 4 clients. Not enough to sustain the version of Altara she'd been running before. Not close. But enough to establish a pattern, a direction, a coherent argument to herself that she was building towards something rather than just surviving inside of something. The distinction mattered more than she'd expected. She'd moved the laptop off the kitchen table and set up a proper desk in the corner. Small thing. She'd bought a second-hand desk lamp at a thrift store for $8, and it threw a slightly yellow light that was not ideal, but it was her light, in her corner, and that was enough. She told Ethan about the manufacturing client on a Thursday evening, not because she'd planned to, but because Lily had asked, "How's the business doctor stuff going?" with the directness she applied to everything, and Sophia had found herself describing the floor walk, the conversation with the operations manager, The two department heads who'd been silently warring for 3 years and dragging everyone around them into the damage zone. How do you fix that? Lily asked. If they won't talk to each other. You make them, Sophia said, but carefully. You give them a structure that makes the conversation unavoidable without making it feel like a confrontation. That sounds like what Dad does when I'm fighting with Emma at school. Ethan looked up from his coffee. That's different. It's not that different, Sophia said. He pointed at her. Don't encourage this. Lily looked at Sophia with an expression of deep satisfaction, which was the expression she deployed whenever an adult agreed with her in front of another adult. Sophia laughed, and the warmth of it surprised her again. That specific involuntary quality, the laugh that happened before she decided to have it. It was becoming more frequent. She wasn't sure when that had happened. At some point between November and March, the laugh had changed from something she noticed to something she didn't. And the noticing of its absence was what told her it had been gone for longer than she'd understood. A week later, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. She'd been in the middle of drafting a proposal, and she had a policy about unknown numbers during work hours that she'd established after the second debt collection call had come in during an actual client meeting, and she'd had to explain the pause with a lie smooth enough to satisfy, but specific enough to not require follow-up. She picked up. Sophia Bennett? Speaking. My name is Daniel Park. I'm a partner at Kinsley Ventures. I got your name from a contact of mine, Ethan Walker. He did some work at my property last month and mentioned you were a business consultant. I looked at your background and I'd like to have a conversation. She held the phone very still, looked at the wall across from her desk. The yellow lamplight was on because the afternoon had turned gray outside. What kind of conversation? She said. We have a portfolio company that's stalling. I won't give you specifics on the phone, but we're looking for someone outside the existing team to come in with fresh eyes and tell us what we're missing. Your background at Altara, the client development work specifically, is the kind of thing I think we need. She heard it. The Altara mention. He'd said it neutrally, which meant either he didn't know the full story or he did and had decided it didn't change his read. I should tell you, she said, that my departure from Altara wasn't... I know about the board situation, he said. I know Marcus Vale. I've seen how he operates. A pause. That's not a disqualifier from my perspective. What matters to me is the work you did before that happened, and what Ethan said about you. What did Ethan say about you? She heard the slip before she finished the sentence. About me, she corrected. What did Ethan say about me? If Park noticed, he was polite enough not to comment. He said you were one of the sharpest people he'd met in a while and that you'd helped him see something about his business that had been sitting right in front of him for 2 years. In my experience, that's a more reliable reference than a resume. She looked at the wall, the yellow lamplight. I'm available for a conversation, she said. They scheduled it for the following Wednesday. She hung up and sat for a moment in the specific silence that follows a phone call that might be nothing or might be important and you genuinely don't know which. Then she called Ethan. He picked up on the third ring. Hey. Daniel Park called me. A brief pause. Yeah. You gave him my name. I did. When were you going to tell me? I wasn't sure he'd call, Ethan said. I didn't want to. I didn't want you to wait on it if it didn't happen. She sat with that, turned it over. She understood the logic. She also understood on a slightly different level what it meant that he'd done it at all. Not just the action, but the shape of it, the way it had been done quietly, without announcement, without asking her if it was okay, but also without asking for anything back. You could have told me, she said, that you were doing it. Yeah. He didn't make an excuse for it. I should have. I just want to know things like that. I know. I'm sorry. She exhaled. It's a good lead. He sounded serious. He is serious. He's got a real portfolio. 3 companies, one of them is pretty significant. He knows how to evaluate people. A pause. I told him the truth. I didn't oversell it. What exactly did you tell him? He said it the same way Park had reported it, almost word for word. She was one of the sharpest people he'd met. She'd helped him see something he'd been avoiding for 2 years. Simple and accurate. That's very nice of you, she said. It's just what I think. She didn't have a response to that. She looked at the yellow lamplight on the wall, thought about what it meant that someone was thinking things like that about her and saying them out loud to other people. Not as flattery, not as performance, just as an accounting of what was true. "Thank you," she said. The word felt inadequate for what she was trying to give back to him, but it was what she had. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just go in there and show him what you can do." The meeting with Daniel Park was in a glass-fronted office building downtown, 31st floor, the kind of space Sophia had spent years in and found she could walk into now with a complicated double feeling. She knew this world, had operated in it fluently for years, but she was walking into it from outside now, which gave everything a slightly different quality of light. She noticed the things she hadn't noticed when she'd belonged there, the way the reception staff calibrated their warmth based on small signals. She hadn't been aware she was reading the particular acoustic of high ceilings and strategic furnishings that was designed to communicate a kind of authority without saying so directly. She wore the good blazer, not the gray one she'd worn on her birthday, but a navy one she'd kept from before, the one that fit correctly and did not have any complicated associations. She arrived 8 minutes early and sat in the reception area with her phone in her bag and looked out at the city spread below, and thought about nothing in particular. This was a technique she'd developed. When she was nervous before a pitch, the worst thing she could do was review her notes one more time. The preparation was done, or it wasn't. What mattered now was being present. Park was 50, fit, with the kind of direct attention that some people mistake for intensity, but was actually just, he looked at you like you were the only thing in the room, and he expected you to do the same. He shook her hand without warm-up and said, "I'll be honest with you from the start because I find it saves time." And she thought, yes, this is someone I can work with. The company was a mid-sized tech services firm, 60 employees, Series B funding, revenue that had grown steadily for 3 years and then flatlined for 8 months. The executive team had been through 2 rounds of internal strategy sessions and come out with competing diagnoses. The board was nervous. Park was nervous in the way experienced investors get nervous. Not panicked, just watchful. The way someone watches a gauge they've been watching for a long time and knows the relevant range and knows when something is off by a little bit, and that a little bit matters. "What I want from you," he said, "is someone who comes in without the political residue. The team is smart, but they're too close to it. They're protecting their lanes." He pushed a thin folder across the table. "That's the summary financials and the last 2 strategy decks. I want your first read within 2 weeks, and I want it honest. If it's bad news, I want the bad news." She opened the folder, looked at the first page. Her eyes moved across the numbers the way a doctor's eyes move across a scan. Not slowly, not with effort, just reading. "What's your current read on where the problem originates?" she asked. "The CEO says it's a sales methodology issue. The CSO says it's a product positioning issue. My own view is it's neither, but I want someone to tell me what it actually is." She looked up. "When did the growth stall relative to when you closed the Series B?" He blinked, just once. "About 4 months after." She nodded, looked back at the folder. Post-funding stalls at that interval are usually not about sales methodology or product positioning. They're usually about what happens to an organization's internal culture when the external pressure changes. Before the funding, everyone's aligned by necessity. After, that alignment doesn't have the same engine, and you see fracturing along existing fault lines that nobody had time to notice before. She set the folder down. "I can't tell you that's what it is without looking at it properly, but that's where I'd start." Park looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Okay," in the specific tone that means more than okay. They talked for 90 minutes. She asked more questions than she answered, because that was how she'd always worked. Gather first, conclude later, resist the pressure to perform certainty before you have it. By the time she left, she had the folder in her bag and a 2-week engagement agreed on terms that were, by comparison to Altara's rates, modest, but by comparison to her last 8 months, represented real money and, more importantly, real access. A portfolio company at a venture firm was not just one client. It was a window into a network, a chance to prove something in a room that talked to other rooms. She walked out of the building into the March afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The air was cold, but there was something in it. The quality of the light again, that shifting thing she'd been noticing on her morning runs. More of it now, at 4 in the afternoon, than there had been in January. She took her phone out and called Ethan before she'd made a conscious decision to. "How'd it go?" he said. He picked up on the first ring, which she would think about later. Good, really good, I think. She started walking toward the parking garage. He's sharp. The engagement is real. It's the kind of thing that could open doors if I do it right. You'll do it right. She shook her head, smiling at the sidewalk. You have an unearned confidence in me. It's not unearned. You've seen me drink coffee and eat cake. That's most of what you know about me professionally. I've seen how you think, he said. That's most of what matters professionally. She pushed into the parking garage, footsteps echoing. I should have known Park earlier. Someone like him. I spent 6 years at Altara working with clients who were fine, solid, good businesses, but nobody who thought the way he does. If I'd had access to that kind of thinking earlier, I might have seen Marcus coming. Maybe, Ethan said, or maybe you needed to lose the company to meet me in a bakery. She stopped walking. That's a terrible thing to say, she said. Yeah, he said, but you're not disagreeing with it. She stood in the cold concrete of the parking garage and looked at the overhead light and thought about what it would mean to agree with that, what it would require her to believe about how things work, about loss and sequence, and the way one thing leads to another in directions you can't map from inside them. I'm not disagreeing, she said. I don't know if I believe it, but I'm not disagreeing. That's enough for now, he said. The 2 weeks on the Park engagement were the hardest she'd worked since before the collapse. Not emotionally, but cognitively. She was back at a scale and complexity level that she hadn't touched since Altara, working inside a real organization with real stakes, navigating the specific political currents of a team that was under pressure and coping with it in the ways people cope. Some by overworking, some by overtalking, some by quietly retreating into their own domains and hoping the problem resolved before it became unavoidable. She recognized all of it. She'd done some of it herself. What she hadn't fully anticipated was how good she was at this. Not in a self-congratulatory way. She'd known, abstractly, that her skills were intact, that losing Altara hadn't taken the competence with it. But knowing it abstractly and experiencing it concretely were different things. She sat in rooms with the Kinsley Portfolio Company's executive team and asked questions and watched the conversations that followed her questions. And she could see it. The shape of the problem resolving in real time. The fault lines revealing themselves exactly where she'd expected them to be. The real issue, as she'd suspected from that first meeting, was post-funding culture fracture. The founding team had spent 3 years in a unified by necessity sprint and had developed deep loyalty to each other and almost no formal process for disagreement. When the funding arrived and the team scaled from 20 to 60 people, the founders had simply continued operating the way they always had, by instinct and mutual trust, while the new employees had no framework for how decisions actually got made. The result was a company running 2 parallel operating systems that weren't talking to each other, and the growth stall was the symptom, not the disease. She wrote this up in 14 pages, with specific recommendations and a sequenced implementation plan, and delivered it in a meeting with Park and the CEO on a Thursday morning. The CEO, a 34-year-old man named Kevin Cho, who had built the company from an idea and clearly loved it with the specific vulnerable intensity of someone who has made a thing and is now afraid of losing it, read through her summary in silence while Park watched him. Then Cho looked up and said, "This is the thing nobody's been willing to say." "Most people aren't willing to say the thing that implies the problem starts at the top," Sophia said, "even when it does." "Is that an implication?" "It's a direct statement." She kept her voice even. "You're not a bad CEO. You built something real. But the skills that built it aren't the same skills that scale it, and you haven't updated the operating system. That's not a character flaw. It's a transition point. The question is whether you want to make the transition." Cho looked at Park. Park looked at Cho. "She's right," Park said. Cho exhaled, looked back at Sophia. "How long will it take?" "To fix entirely. A year minimum. To stop the bleeding and start seeing metrics move in the right direction?" 90 days, if you're willing to be uncomfortable." He nodded slowly. The nod of someone who'd been hoping for a different number and had known, even while hoping, that they weren't going to get it. "Okay," he said. She drove back from that meeting with the windows down, even though it was cold, because she needed the air. Not because anything had gone wrong. Everything had gone right. But doing the thing she was good at scale, after months of doing it in small rooms with small stakes, had given her something she didn't quite have a name for yet. Not pride. Something more specific. Something closer to the feeling of picking up a tool you haven't used in a while and finding it still fits your hand exactly right. She told none of this to Ethan that Thursday evening because Lily was having a difficult night. She'd had a disagreement with the same Emma from school, a recurring situation, and she arrived at the bakery quieter than usual and sat in her chair with the sketchbook in front of her and didn't draw anything. Sophia noticed. Ethan noticed. Neither of them made a production of it. About 20 minutes in, Lily said without looking up, "What do you do when someone says something mean and they don't even think it was mean?" "You mean when they don't know they hurt you?" Sophia asked. "Yeah." "Do you want them to know?" Lily considered. "Maybe, but I don't want to make it a whole thing." "That's the hard part," Sophia said. "If you tell them, it might become a whole thing. If you don't, you carry it by yourself." "That doesn't seem like a great choice." "It's usually not." Lily thought about this. "What do you do?" Sophia looked at her coffee cup, thought about the honest answer, which was that she had historically carried things entirely by herself until they became too heavy to carry, and had only recently, in the last few months, started doing something different. "I'm learning to say the thing," she said. "Even when it's uncomfortable, it's easier than it sounds once you start." Lily seemed to absorb this. Then, "What if they get mad?" "Then they get mad. Their being mad doesn't make what you felt wrong." Lily looked at her for a moment with that direct, undeflecting gaze. "How come you know stuff like that?" "I had to learn the hard way." "What's the hard way?" "Not saying the thing for a long time, and then eventually paying for it." Lily nodded, gravely, with the expression of someone storing information for future use. Ethan had been listening to this from across the table without speaking. When Sophia glanced at him, he looked away, but not fast enough. There was something in his expression that she caught in the half-second before it rearranged itself, something that looked like the specific attention of a person who is hearing something directed at a child and understanding it's also directed at them. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. What happened next happened over the following weeks, gradually enough that it didn't feel like a single moment until it had passed. The park engagement extended. Kevin Cho hired her through the end of the quarter. She took on a fifth client, a small restaurant group that was losing money at one location and had been attributing it to foot traffic when the real issue was a cost structure that had never been properly analyzed. She started keeping a wait list, which was a concept so foreign to the reality of 6 months ago that when she set it up in her calendar, she sat looking at it for a moment before she could continue. She moved out of the studio apartment, not into anything large. A one-bedroom, third floor, a building 12 blocks away with natural light in the morning, and a kitchen she could actually stand in without pivoting at 90 degrees every time she needed a different utensil. She moved in on a Saturday in late March with rented boxes and 2 trips in the Civic. Ethan showed up with his truck without being asked. She had not asked him. She hadn't known she was going to need to ask until the truck was outside, and she was suddenly aware that she was genuinely grateful, and that her gratitude was mixed with something slightly uncomfortable, the way genuine gratitude sometimes is when you're not used to needing people. He carried the heavy things without comment. Lily came along and organized Sophia's books by size, which was not how Sophia organized her books, but which she decided not to correct because Lily was clearly having the time of her life, and the books could be reorganized later. At the end of the day, the 3 of them sat on the floor of the new apartment eating pizza out of the box because Sophia didn't have a table yet, which Lily found extremely funny and hilarious. And Ethan ate 2 slices in the serious, efficient way he ate everything and looked around at the space with an appraiser's eye. "The light's good in here," he said. "Yeah." Sophia looked at the window. The late afternoon was hitting the opposite wall in a long diagonal stripe. It was the thing that decided it. The light? "When I walked in to see the place, the light was doing this." She gestured at the wall, and I thought, I want to wake up to that. So. He looked at the light on the wall, nodded slowly. "Good reason." They sat in the comfortable quiet of people who have been in enough rooms together that silence doesn't require management. Lily had fallen asleep against Sophia's couch, the only furniture properly in place, the rest still in boxes, with a piece of pizza on the floor beside her and her shoes still on. "I have to get her home," Ethan said. "I know." Sophia didn't move immediately. She was looking at Lily asleep against the couch. The uneven pigtails, the dinosaur jacket, The absolute unselfconscious trust of a child who falls asleep wherever she runs out of steam. Something about it pressed against a place in Sophia's chest that she didn't have good language for. She likes you a lot, Ethan said. His voice was quiet, pitched not to wake Lily. She doesn't do this with people. She's friendly with everyone, but this is different. I know, Sophia said. I can tell. She paused. I like her a lot too. Both of you. He looked at her. She looked back. The light on the wall had shifted, the diagonal moving lower, longer, the day tilting toward evening. There were things under that sentence, things they'd been not saying for weeks, accumulating in the specific way unsaid things accumulate. Not harmlessly, but quietly, building a pressure that wasn't uncomfortable enough to act on and too significant to simply ignore. She wasn't ready to pull at that thread tonight. She thought maybe he knew that. She thought maybe he wasn't ready either, and that they were in the same place at the same time in that specific, rare way, which was valuable enough not to rush. Thank you for today, she said. The truck? Everything. It's what you do, he said. She thought about what he'd said in December. I no longer knew what I was allowed to want. She thought about the phone call where she'd asked him the real answer and gotten it. She thought about what it meant that this man, who had every reason to be closed off and guarded, had been steadily, consistently present through everything, not because she'd asked him to be, but because that was apparently just the shape of him. She looked at him and said, I know you know about the park referral, but you've done other things. I don't always know what they are, but I can tell. He was quiet. Other clients you've sent my way, or said things to the right people. She kept her voice even, not accusatory. I'm not angry. I just want to know. He exhaled, looked at the floor. Park. And the logistics firm. That was a guy I know whose brother runs it. I mentioned you when his name came up. And the restaurant group, I did some tile work in one of the locations. The owner was complaining about the one location that was losing money, and I said I knew someone. He looked up. That's all of them. All of them. Yeah. She did the math in her head. 3 of her 5 clients. 3 of the 5 people who had said yes to her in the last 5 months had gotten there through this man, without her knowing, without him asking for credit or acknowledgement or anything at all. Why didn't you tell me, she said. I don't know. He seemed to mean this. It wasn't deflection, it was genuine. I thought, if I told you, you'd feel like you owed me something, and I didn't want that. I just wanted you to have the work. She looked at him for a long time. In her entire adult life, she could not think of a single person outside of a transaction who had done something significant for her and not wanted the accounting settled. Not aggressively. Most people weren't crass about it, but there had always been an implicit ledger. People helped you, and they noted it, and eventually, consciously or not, they came to collect. That was just how it worked. She'd believed genuinely that that was just how it worked. Ethan, she said, I know, I should have told you. That's not what I was going to say. He looked at her. She didn't know how to finish the sentence. She wasn't sure there was a finish. Some things don't have one. They just trail into the specific emotion of the moment, and that has to be enough. Thank you, she said. Again. The same word, still inadequate, still the only one she had. He nodded, stood up, carefully gathered Lily, who woke partially, made a small sound of protest, and then collapsed against his shoulder with the resignation of someone who has made peace with being carried. Sophia stood at the door of her new apartment and watched them go down the hall, the man and the child, and thought about what had just been said and what had not been said, and what the difference between those two things was going to mean for the 3 of them going forward. The light on the wall had gone. Evening now, the room settling into its first nighttime. Her books stacked in the wrong order, her boxes still half full, the pizza box still open on the floor. The apartment smelled like cardboard and takeout, and the faint chemical scent of fresh paint, the particular smell of a space that hasn't become a home yet, but is on its way. She stood in the middle of it and breathed. 4 months ago, she had sat in a parking lot and counted $2.11. She was not fixed. She was not finished. There was still so much work ahead of her, professionally, personally, in all the unnamed ways that rebuilding a life requires. And nobody tells you about up front, because if they did, you might not attempt it. She still had nights when the weight of what she'd lost settled on her chest and wouldn't move until morning. She still had moments when she caught herself calculating what Marcus Vale might be doing, what Altara had become under the board's control, whether any of the people she'd worked with for 6 years had thought about her. But she was standing in a new apartment with natural light in the morning, and she had 5 clients and a wait list, and the particular clarity that comes from having been at the bottom and discovered that the bottom is survivable. And she turned this over carefully, holding it lightly, 2 people who had shown up for her without a ledger. That was not a small thing. That was, she thought, probably the least small thing she had. Spring came properly in April. The kind that actually meant it. Warm enough to leave the jacket unzipped. Long enough evenings that the city changed its pace. People moving differently on the sidewalks, as if the light had given them back something they'd been rationing. Sophia noticed it the way she'd been noticing everything this year, with a specific attentiveness she hadn't had before. The attentiveness of someone who had spent months with very little and had developed the habit of registering what was present rather than cataloging what was absent. The morning runs got easier. Not in terms of effort. She pushed harder now, longer routes. The 2-mile loop extended to 3.5. But easier in the sense that the argument with herself had stopped. She just went. The body had finally accepted that this was what they did now, and had stopped filing objections. Her new apartment had become, without her noticing the exact transition, a home. The books were still in Lily's size order arrangement, because she'd started to find she didn't mind it. There was something unexpectedly honest about organizing by physical reality rather than subject matter, and she'd decided to let it stand as a reminder of the afternoon they'd moved in, the pizza boxes on the floor, the light on the wall. She'd gotten a table. A real one, second-hand but solid, with 4 chairs that didn't quite match, which she'd bought from a woman on the 3rd floor who was moving to Portland and needed them gone by Friday. The table mattered more than it should have, having a place to sit for meals that wasn't her desk or her couch, having the specific ritual of setting things out, eating deliberately, existing in her own space as if she were worth feeding properly, was something she'd let slide during the worst months in the studio and was now deliberately, consciously rebuilding. These were the things nobody talked about when they talked about professional recovery. The small domestic architecture of self-respect. The table. The morning run. The real coffee. The things that said quietly, no one in particular, I still live here. I'm still doing this. The Kinsley engagement wrapped at the end of March, with Kevin Cho telling her she'd done, in his words, the thing I most didn't want to happen, but most needed to happen, which she took as the highest possible compliment available in that category of work. Park emailed her afterward, not with effusive praise, which she wouldn't have trusted anyway, but with a clean, direct message. Good work. I'll be in touch. 4 words after the first 2, which was all she needed from him. What Park's referral had given her was not just Cho or the engagement fee. It was the particular credibility that comes from doing real work inside a real organization and having someone serious vouch for the result. The consulting world ran on a reputation infrastructure that was, in most cases, invisible to the people inside it. Nobody announced why they called the person they just called them. And the chain of invisible endorsements that led to the call was almost never traced back to its origin. But Sophia had spent 6 years at Altara learning how that infrastructure worked, and she understood now, in April, that what was accumulating behind her was beginning to look like the early foundation of something. She had 7 clients. The waitlist had 3 names on it. She'd turned down 2 engagements in the past month, not because they weren't real work, but because accepting them would have required her to overextend in ways that would compromise the quality of what she was doing elsewhere. And she'd made a decision, conscious and deliberate, that she would not compromise quality in exchange for volume. Not again. Not the way she'd done in Altara's last year, when the revenue pressure had been so severe that she'd taken clients she knew weren't right fits and ended up doing mediocre work for all of them, and excellent work for none. She said no to those 2 engagements and felt, each time, the specific clean feeling of a decision made from the right reasons rather than the fearful ones. She was, by anyone's measure, recovering. Professionally. Financially. In the ways that left a traceable record. The other ways were harder to measure, and she was still in the middle of them. She and Ethan had not talked about what had happened in her apartment on moving day, not the conversation about the clients he'd referred, and not the quieter thing underneath it, the thing neither of them had named. They'd returned to Thursdays as if the evening hadn't shifted anything, and Sophia had let it, because there was a version of her that was very practiced at returning to the surface after something had briefly been deeper, and that version was much easier to operate than the alternative. But April was different from March, in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. He called her on a Tuesday to ask whether she thought he should take on a business partner for the home repair company. A guy he'd worked with before, but experienced, reliable, they had compatible work styles. Taking him on would let Ethan bid for larger contracts, the kind he'd been passing on because he couldn't execute them alone. The upside was real. So was the vulnerability. It would require formalizing the business structure, dividing decision authority, and accepting that things he currently controlled entirely would now require negotiation. She talked him through it the way she always did. Questions first, letting him work toward his own answer rather than handing him hers. What specifically are you afraid of? What's the scenario that worries you most? If that scenario happened, what would you do? At the end, he said, "You know what the answer is, don't you?" "I have a read," she said. "But it's your company. Tell me your read." "You should do it. The risk profile is manageable and the ceiling without a partner is too low for where you're actually trying to go. But I think you already know that." "Yeah." A pause. "I just wanted someone to tell me it wasn't crazy." "It's not crazy." "Okay." Another pause. Sophia, the way he said her name, the slight shift in register, the specific gravity of it, told her the conversation was about to change lanes. "Yeah," she said. There's something I keep not saying, and I don't think it's because I don't want to say it." She looked at the wall across from her desk. The morning light came in at that angle now, the stripe she'd fallen in love with in the apartment showing walk. "Okay," she said. "I think you know what it is." "I might." She kept her voice steady. "But I think you should say it anyway." A pause long enough that she could hear him breathing, which told her he was nervous, which told her something about the stakes he was operating at right now. Ethan Walker was not a man who let nervousness be audible as a general rule. "I'm not good at this," he said. "The saying things. Claire and I were together since college. We didn't have to say much. We just knew. And since then I haven't—" He stopped, tried again. "I've been in the same holding pattern for 4 years, and I told myself it was about Lily, which is partly true. But it's also that starting something felt like it required more of me than I had available. And then you came into the picture, and the math started to change, and I—" Another stop. "I realize I'm doing a terrible job of this." "You're not," she said, quietly. "I don't want to complicate what we have. I know how much what we have matters to you, to Lily, to Ethan. Yeah. I know what you're trying to say." A long pause. "Okay. And the math has been changing for me too." She said it simply, without decoration. "For a while now. I was waiting until I felt like I was standing on solid enough ground to say it. Because I didn't want to say it from a position of needing something. I wanted to say it from a position of choosing something." The silence on the other end of the line had a different quality than his other silences. Warmer, somehow. "Are you on solid enough ground now?" he asked. She looked around her apartment. The table with the mismatched chairs. The books in size order. The morning light doing what it did at this hour, filling the room with the particular gold of early April. "Getting there," she said. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." Us. What came after was not dramatic in the way stories usually require drama. There was no declaration in the rain, no collision of bodies in a doorway, no single scene that could be identified as the moment. What there was instead was a gradual and honest shift in what they were to each other. One that everybody in the room had probably known about for weeks before anyone said it directly, including Lily, who had the particular radar of a 7-year-old who had been her father's primary companion for most of her conscious life, and was not inclined to miss changes in his atmospheric pressure. The first time Ethan took Sophia's hand, actually took it, not the casual brush of a crowd or a shared doorway moment, but deliberately, consciously, in the middle of a walk they'd been taking on a Saturday afternoon in April, while Lily ran ahead toward a fountain she'd spotted. He did it without looking at her, just reached over and took her hand the way you take a thing you've decided you're allowed to have. She looked at his profile. He looked straight ahead. Lily, 20 feet ahead, had reached the fountain and was determining whether its rules applied to her. Sophia's hand closed around his. That was the whole scene. unremarkable in every visible detail except for everything. Well, she was in a meeting with a new potential client on a Thursday morning in May, a mid-sized marketing firm whose growth trajectory had stalled in ways that were beginning to look familiar, when her phone buzzed in her bag with a number she hadn't seen in 14 months. She didn't pick up. She was in a meeting. She set her phone face down and finished the conversation, and the client agreed to a 4-week initial engagement, and she shook hands and walked out to her car and sat inside it and looked at the missed call. Marcus Vale. She sat with the phone in her hand for a full minute. Her first feeling was not anger, which surprised her. Her first feeling was something closer to exhaustion, the specific tiredness of something you've been bracing against for a long time and have finally allowed yourself to stop bracing against, and now the thing has showed up anyway. She did not call back. He called again an hour later. She was at her desk. She picked up. Sophia. His voice was the same. That particular warmth that took a long time to understand was calibrated rather than genuine. I've been wondering how you were doing. Have you? She said. I heard you're consulting independently. Some mutual contacts have mentioned your name. What do you want, Marcus? A brief pause. He wasn't used to her being direct with him. In the years of their partnership, she'd always operated with a buffer of professional courtesy that she now understood had served his interests more than hers. I want to have a conversation, he said. I think there are things that could benefit us both. The board made decisions that weren't entirely stop. She said it the way she'd learned to say it. Not heated, not raised, just a wall. I don't need a reframe of what happened. I was there. Sophia, what specifically do you want? He shifted. She could hear it. The recalibration of approach. Altara has been struggling, he said. The clients we took over haven't. The relationship transition was difficult. There are structural problems that need the kind of attention you're very good at. You thought I'd help you fix the company you took from me. A silence. I understand that's a complicated ask, he said. He said it carefully, the way a man says something he's been practicing. It's not complicated, she said. I'm not going to do it. That's simple. The fee would be significant. I know you're building something, and the exposure would... Marcus. She stopped him again. I want to make sure I'm being clear because I know sometimes I'm not as direct as I should be with you. I'm not going to consult for Altara. I'm not going to consult for you. Not for any fee, and not for any exposure. What you did cost me more than money, and I don't need what you're offering badly enough to pretend otherwise. She paused. I hope the company finds the help it needs. I mean that, but it won't be from me. She ended the call. She sat at her desk for a while afterward, not doing anything in particular, just sitting with it. She waited for the anger to come, the full, justified version of it, the kind that had a backlog of 14 months behind it. And what came instead was quieter. Not forgiveness, which felt like too large and theatrical a concept for what she actually felt. Just the absence of the wound in its active form. He had done the thing he'd done, and it had cost her nearly everything, and she had rebuilt from it into something she was, honestly, more proud of than what she'd had before. Not because loss is secretly a gift. She didn't believe that. It was too easy. But because of what she'd found out about herself inside of it. What she was made of, what held when everything else was taken. She'd found that out. He couldn't take it back. There was nothing left for him to take. She opened her laptop and went back to work. She told Ethan about the call that Thursday. Not right away. They ate their cake first because Lily had decided that May required them to try the coconut cream slice they'd been ignoring for months, and this was not negotiable. So they tried the coconut cream slice, and Lily delivered a verdict of good but different, which was her standard phrase for things she liked but wanted to reserve the right to revise her position on. After Lily had relocated to the pastry case to conduct further research, Sophia said, Marcus called me. Ethan looked up. His expression shifted. Not dramatically, but she'd learned his face well enough by now to read the small adjustments. A stillness around the jaw. The particular quality of attention that meant he was choosing his words carefully. What did he want? She told him. The Altara struggles, the consulting offer, the fee that would have been significant and 6 months ago might have been genuinely tempting. What did you tell him? No. Ethan nodded, looked at his coffee. How do you feel? Steadier than I expected. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I thought hearing his voice would, I don't know, undo something, but it didn't. She paused. I think I'm actually on the other side of it, the Altara thing. I don't know exactly when that happened. I think it happened gradually, Ethan said. Those things usually do. I kept waiting for a moment when I'd know it was done. There wasn't one. It was just one day the center of gravity was somewhere else. He looked at her. Where is it now? She held his gaze. Here, she said. Mostly here. The word mostly was doing some work, and they both knew it. She was still building, still had clients to cultivate and a business to structure, and all the practical architecture of a professional life that was 6 months old and required constant attention. She was not done. She was not going to be done for a long time. But here was where the gravity was. This table. These two people. The slightly absurd coconut cream slice that Lily was currently interrogating the counterstaff about. June arrived. Long days, the light lasting until nearly 9 in the evening. The city in that particular summer starting mood that makes people make plans they won't keep and mean it when they make them. Sophia registered her consulting firm. She'd been operating as a sole proprietor under her own name, which was fine for the scale she'd been at, but the work had grown past that threshold, and the professional infrastructure needed to catch up. She spent a week on the naming, not because it was a complicated decision, but because it was a weighted one. The name of a company is a commitment, a flag planted, a statement of intention that outlasts the moment it's made. She called it Meridian Advisory. She didn't explain the name to anyone. It meant the highest point the sun reaches in its arc across the sky, the moment before it begins to descend. She'd thought about that on one of her morning runs, that she had been at the top of something, and then she'd descended further than she'd thought descent was possible, and she was climbing again now. She was not back to the top. She wasn't sure the top was the goal anymore, but she was moving toward her own meridian, whatever that turned out to mean. The registration took 3 weeks to finalize. She got the paperwork on a Wednesday afternoon, the official documents with the state seal, the EIN, the whole apparatus of official existence that a business requires to be real in the way institutions recognize. She sat at her table with the mismatched chairs and spread the documents out and looked at them. She thought about Altara, the first time she'd held those documents, the original incorporation 6 years ago in the kitchen of her then apartment, the one she'd shared with 2 other people because she couldn't afford to live alone, working off a folding table at midnight because the kitchen table was taken. She'd been 24. She'd had 2 clients and a business plan that she'd revised 47 times and was still not entirely confident in, and she'd held those documents and felt something she could only describe as the specific terror of beginning, the moment when an idea becomes a commitment and you can no longer pretend it's theoretical. This was different. She was 30, not 24. She had 7 clients and a wait list and a year's worth of evidence that she knew what she was doing. She did not have the terror of beginning. What she had instead was something quieter and more durable, a deep private conviction that this time she understood what she was building and why it mattered and what she was willing to pay for it and what she was not. She called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. Meridian Advisory is officially a company, she said. A beat. Then, Sophia. Yeah. That's a big deal. I know. She looked at the documents on the table. I wanted to tell you first. She heard him exhale. Not dramatically, just the kind of breath a person lets out when something they've been holding resolves. I'm glad you did. I couldn't have gotten here without... Don't, he said, gently but clearly. You did this. The park referral and whatever else I did, those were small things. What you did with them was you. You can let me be grateful. You can be grateful. I'm just not taking credit for what wasn't mine. She shook her head at the documents. You're very annoying sometimes. Yeah, you mentioned. She laughed, the involuntary kind, fully out before she got to decide to have it. It was late June when things between them shifted for the second time, and this one had an actual scene. They'd been at her apartment, not a Thursday, just a Saturday evening, the 3 of them eating takeout at the table with the mismatched chairs, while Lily attempted to teach Ethan the rules of a card game she'd invented that appeared to have no internally consistent logic. Ethan was losing, which Lily found enormously satisfying. Sophia had been half in the game and half in a proposal she'd been restructuring in her head all day, and she surfaced from that at some point to find that Lily had fallen asleep on the couch. Again, the same easy collapse of a child who runs out of fuel mid-activity. And she and Ethan were sitting across from each other with the card game between them and the apartment quiet around them. He was looking at her. She looked back. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He paused. "I was just thinking that this is really good. This specific thing. The three of us." She looked at the table. The cards, the takeout containers. Lily's shoes kicked off near the couch. "Yeah," she said. "It is." "I don't want to mess it up," he said. "I've been thinking about that. How much I don't want to mess it up." "Is that why it's taken you this long?" "Partly." He turned a card over in his hands, not looking at it. "And partly because, Lily, she's attached to you. If we tried something and it didn't work out, it wouldn't just be about us. It would be about her, too." Sophia looked at the sleeping child on the couch. She thought about what it would cost Lily if Sophia disappeared from her life. She thought about what it would cost Sophia. Both of those things were real, and both of them mattered. "I know," she said. "I think about that too. And you're still—" "I'm still here, Ethan." She said it simply, with the particular firmness that comes not from certainty about outcomes, but from certainty about intentions. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not building something here that I'm planning to leave." He looked at her for a long moment. The light in the apartment was low, the standing lamp she'd gotten 2 months ago throwing a warm pool near the couch where Lily slept. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I believe you." He put the card down. "I think that's the thing I needed to hear. Not a plan or a promise about the future, just that." She understood. He had lost the last person he'd built a life with. Not by choice, not through failure, just through the random brutality of the world delivering an outcome nobody had prepared for. The scar tissue from that was not going anywhere. But scar tissue, she'd learned this year, was not the same as the wound. It was evidence that the wound had been survived, and it held. "I believe you too," she said, by which she meant, "I know you're not going to disappear. I know you're going to stay." He reached across the table, the same way he'd taken her hand on the walk in April, direct, deliberate, without flourish. She turned her hand over and his closed around it. Lily slept on the couch, entirely unaware, her breathing the even, slow rhythm of someone completely at rest. And the three of them were in the same room at the end of a Saturday in June, which was, against all reasonable probability given where Sophia had been standing with $2.11 on a November evening 7 months before, exactly where they were supposed to be. What? July came in hot and full of motion. Sophia's business was growing at a rate that required her to think differently about structure. Not just her process, but who she was going to be in the next iteration of this. She'd been operating as a solo consultant, every engagement personal, every analysis done by her hands. That model had a ceiling, and she was starting to brush against it. She started making notes about what a team would look like, who she'd want to hire first, what role would extend her capacity most effectively, what kind of person she was building toward. She did this in the same yellow lamplight at the same desk, the notes messy and inconclusive the way first drafts are, and she thought about the woman who'd sat in a studio apartment making instant coffee and sending applications into a void, and felt no contempt for her. That woman had been doing the only thing available to her with the tools she had. This woman had more tools. That was all the difference was. She had a dinner with Park in mid-July. Not an engagement meeting, just dinner. The kind of dinner that means someone has decided to include you in their world in a way that isn't purely transactional. He brought 2 other people, investors she didn't know, and over 2 hours at a restaurant that was several income levels above her current practical range. She held her own in a conversation about market structures and portfolio strategy and the specific failure modes of mid-stage companies, and she did not once feel the imposter sensation that had dogged her through the first years of Altara, when she'd sat across tables from people like this and privately wondered if they could tell she was working harder than they were just to maintain the altitude. She was not working harder than them. She was just working. That was enough. One of the investors asked, at the end of the evening, for her card. She gave it, Meridian Advisory, Sophia Bennett, founder. He looked at it the way people look at something they intend to remember. She drove home with the windows down in the July heat and thought about what it meant that a year ago she was in a studio apartment reading rejection emails and now she was handing business cards to investors at a dinner where the entrees cost more than her weekly grocery budget used to be. Not because money was the measure, she'd learned at significant cost that it wasn't, but because the business card was evidence of a specific journey, and the journey had been paid for in a currency she wouldn't have chosen, but that had, undeniably, bought something real. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced at it at a red light. Ethan, how was dinner? She smiled at the road ahead. Really good, she typed back. Tell you Thursday. His reply came 30 seconds later. Lily wants coconut cream again. Preparing yourself accordingly. She laughed. Alone in her car, windows down, the July city moving past on both sides. Meridian advisory 9 weeks old and already too busy. Ethan's name on her phone screen, Lily's opinions about pastry apparently now a standing fixture in her life. She had not predicted any of this. Not the loss, not the recovery, not the specific texture of what she was building. She had not known, standing in that parking lot in November counting coins in her palm, that she was at the beginning of something rather than the end of everything. That was the thing about bottoms she was starting to understand. They didn't announce themselves. They looked from inside exactly like endings. The beginning part only became visible later, in retrospect, when you could trace the line from where you'd been to where you were and see the shape of it. She could see the shape of it now, imperfect and unfinished and hers. She drove home through the July heat, and the city hummed around her, and the year was halfway over, and she was, by any honest accounting, somewhere she had not expected to be and could not imagine leaving. But the second November came in quieter than the first. Sophia noticed that. She noticed it the way you notice things when you've lived through a version of them before, and have enough distance now to see both. The original and the echo side by side, the contrast between them telling you something that neither could communicate alone. A year ago, November had felt like the inside of a closing fist. This one felt like weather, just weather. Cold coming in, days shortening, the city adjusting its collar. Livable. Normal. A season instead of a sentence. She was still running in the mornings. 4 miles now, a route she'd built over the course of the year by adding small increments until the distance stopped feeling like an achievement and started feeling like the baseline. She ran past the broken streetlight on the corner near her old studio. The city had finally fixed it sometime in August, and she always registered its absence for a half second before remembering, a small ghost of the year she'd had. She ran past Crumbs and Kopi at the far end of the loop, dark at that hour, the lights off. The window she used to sit in front of on Thursday evenings, just glass reflecting the early morning. She ran past it every day without going in and saved it for Thursdays, which had remained, through spring and summer and into this second fall, the fixed point of the week. Meridian Advisory had 8 employees now. 8 was a number she still hadn't fully absorbed. She'd made her first hire in August. A junior analyst named Priya, 26, sharp, and slightly too confident in ways that reminded Sophia of herself at that age, in a way that was both useful and occasionally exhausting. By September, she'd added a second, a project manager named Gus, who had the specific competence of someone who had worked inside large organizations long enough to understand their dysfunction from the inside and was deeply motivated to build something smaller that worked correctly. The 3rd through 8th had come in clusters, each one creating the need for the next. The organization growing with the particular organic logic of a living thing that has found a favorable environment. She had an office. Not a large one. 4 rooms on the 7th floor of a building she'd walked past every day for months without registering it. But real, hers, with a window that faced east and a reception area that currently had a second-hand couch that Priya referred to as aggressively mid-century, and Sophia referred to as paid for in cash, I'll take it. She thought about the desk lamp she'd bought for $8 at the thrift store, the yellow light on the wall of the studio apartment. She still had it. It was on the corner of her desk in the new office, slightly incongruous among the newer things, slightly too warm for the room's overall color temperature. She'd moved it deliberately. Some things you keep not because they're practical, but because they're load-bearing in a different way, because they hold the memory of who you were when you needed them. Whoa. She was in the office on the 2nd Tuesday of November when Priya knocked on the open door and said, "Kevin Cho is on line 1. He says it's not urgent, but he wants to catch up." Sophia picked up. Cho. Bennett. He'd started calling her that sometime around month 3 of their work together, and it had stuck. "You seen the Q3 numbers?" I saw. 31% growth. 31. His voice had the particular quality of a man who has been through enough not to let himself be too loud about good news, but who is clearly, underneath the restraint, doing a small private dance. The board is, I can't overstate how different the temperature is in those meetings now. That's the culture work, she said. That's your team figuring out how to disagree without the whole building falling down. I know. I want to say that I know it wasn't the strategy decks or the market analysis. It was the other stuff, the harder stuff. The other stuff doesn't work without the strategy. You're very stubborn about taking credit. I'm accurate about taking credit. There's a difference. He laughed. The easy laugh of a man who is less afraid of things than he was 8 months ago, which was perhaps the most meaningful metric of all. Park wants to loop you in on something new, he said. He's looking at a Series A company in the logistics tech space. He thinks they have a version of the same problem we had, and he wants you in the room early this time. Tell him to call me. He will. He's just giving you the heads up through me because he thinks you'll take the call faster if you know it's coming. He's not wrong, she admitted. After she hung, she sat for a moment with the morning light coming through the east window. She thought about what 31% meant in concrete terms. The people at Kinsley whose jobs were more stable today than they'd been a year ago. The company that would hire more people next year because the internal machinery was finally running in the same direction. She thought about Kevin Cho at 34, who'd built something from nothing and had come within a hard season of losing it, and had made himself uncomfortable enough to save it. She understood him in a way she hadn't fully understood anyone a year ago. Loss does that, she'd come to think. Not as a lesson the universe deliberately teaches, not as part of any plan or design, but as a side effect of having been at the bottom and found that you were still capable of seeing clearly from down there. Sometimes more clearly than from the top, because the view from the bottom strips things of their ornamentation. You see the structure of things without the decoration. She had been decorated once. It had looked very good and told her almost nothing real about herself. The birthday arrived on a Friday. She was 31. She'd noted the week before that the occasion was approaching with a different internal weather than the year before. Last year, it had loomed, accumulated dread, carried the weight of everything she'd lost, and the visible shortfall between where she was and where she'd expected to be. This year, it arrived more quietly. A day. Her day. A day she planned to have normally, which was itself a kind of gift. She ran her 4 miles in the morning, came back to the apartment, made real coffee, stood at the window in her kitchen watching the street below. A man was walking a dog. A woman was unlocking a bicycle. The regular, unremarkable life of a city morning, the kind of scene that is only beautiful if you have had a period of life in which you couldn't take it for granted. Ethan texted at 7:15, "Happy birthday. Lily has been awake since 6, and she would like me to pass along that she has a plan for tonight, and you are not allowed to ask what it is." Sophia smiled at the phone. "Tell her I'll contain my curiosity. She says that's good because the plan is very important." She got to the office by 8:30, which was earlier than anyone else. She liked these first 30 minutes, the office before it became an office. Just rooms with desks and a slightly aggressive mid-century couch, and the particular quiet of a space that had not yet been activated by the day. She made another coffee from the machine in the kitchenette and sat at her desk and opened her laptop and looked at what the day required of her. There was a new proposal to finalize, a call with a potential client at 10, a team check-in at 2 that Gus ran better than she did, and that she attended primarily to stay connected to what her people were working on and how they were managing it, a call with Park at 4 about the logistics tech company Cho had mentioned. She worked. Cleanly, well, in the state she'd come to recognize as her best operational mode. Not urgent, not anxious, just moving through the work the way you move through familiar terrain. The proposal came together in an hour and a half. The 10 o'clock call went better than she'd expected. The check-in at 2 told her that Priya had found a genuine insight in a dataset she'd been working through that would change the framing of an active engagement, which was the kind of thing that made Sophia think she'd hired the right person, even when Priya's overcorrected confidence was making everyone in the office slightly tired. At 4, she took the Park call. The logistics tech company was real, the problem was recognizable, the timeline was tight. She told him she'd take a look at the preliminary materials over the weekend and come back to him Monday with a first read. "I expected you to negotiate on the timeline," Park said. I don't need to. Monday works. Cho said you'd say that. Cho is getting good at predicting me. That's because you're consistent, Park said. In this business, consistent is rarer than smart. A pause. Happy birthday, by the way. He mentioned that too. She laughed. My client is tracking my birthday. Your client considers you a friend at this point. That's not a complaint. After the call, she sat in the quiet office. Priya and Gus had both gone home. The others had filtered out through the afternoon, and looked at the east-facing window, now showing the city in the early dark of November, lights coming on in the building across the street, the particular visual texture of a city settling into evening. She thought about last November. She did this deliberately, not as punishment, but as calibration, the way a navigator takes a bearing by looking backward to confirm forward direction. She had been there. She was here. The distance between those 2 points was 1 year and a number of things she could not have predicted and would not trade. She closed the laptop, got her coat, turned off the yellow desk lamp last, as she always did, and walked out into the November evening. Crumbs & Co. was warm and smelled exactly as it always had. Butter, sugar, vanilla. The particular alchemy of a place that knows what it is and doesn't try to be anything else. The Christmas decorations were back, in the same partially installed state as the year before, half one season and half another. The tree near the entrance had the same lights blinking in no pattern. Sophia stood inside the door for a moment, just standing, just being in the room. She did this sometimes, took a second with a place before moving through it. A small private practice she'd developed without naming it. They were at the window table. Lily spotted her first, which was always how it went, and her face did the thing it did. The completely open grin of a child who has not yet learned to modulate her happiness for the comfort of observers. She was 8 now, had turned 8 in September, and she was the same and different in the way children are always the same and different across a year. Something in the face more defined, something in the posture more certain, the vocabulary larger, the opinions more detailed, the basic essential liliness absolutely intact. She had a box on the table, a bakery box tied with string. Her hands were pressed flat on the table on either side of it, the same posture she'd had at this exact table a year ago when she'd been looking at cakes through the glass case, that posture of keeping herself from touching a thing she badly wanted to touch. Ethan stood when Sophia came to the table. He kissed her, simply, naturally, the easy physical language of people who have been together long enough that the gesture is no longer a decision, and she leaned into it for a second before sitting down. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since April, with that particular quality of attention that she'd stopped being surprised by and started simply accepting as part of the landscape of her days. "How was work?" "Good. Park has a new company for us. Cho's numbers came in." "Good numbers?" "Very good numbers." He nodded. That was one of the things about Ethan. He registered information about her work without needing to perform enthusiasm about it. He was genuinely glad when things went well and genuinely concerned when they didn't, and he expressed both in a register that matched the actual scale of the thing rather than inflating it for emotional effect. It was one of the things she'd come to rely on in a way she hadn't known she needed. "Sophia." Lily's voice was at maximum significance. "You have to open it now." "Can I sit down first?" "You are sitting down." "Can I take my coat off?" Lily exhaled, which was her expression of deep patience being exercised under duress. "Fine." Sophia took her coat off, got settled, put her hands on the table, looked at the box, looked at Lily. "Okay." Lily pushed it across the table. Sophia pulled the string, lifted the lid. Inside was a birthday cake. Small, lemon yellow, white frosting, 3 daisies piped along the top in pale green. Identical, or as close as memory and intention could manage, to the one from a year ago. The first one. The one with the uneven slices and the single candle, and the wish she hadn't been able to name until after. She looked at it for a moment without speaking. "I told them exactly what it looked like," Lily said. "The flowers had to be in the right place. The lady at the counter said I was very specific, and I said thank you." "It's perfect," Sophia said, and her voice was doing something she wasn't fully in control of. "It's not exactly the same," Lily said, with the honesty of someone who cannot let an inaccuracy stand even when an inaccuracy would be more convenient. "The flowers are a little bigger, but I think that's okay." "I think that's okay too." Lily reached into the pocket of her jacket, the green one, the one with the dinosaur, which she'd had for a year now, and which was becoming visibly small on her, but which she refused to stop wearing, and produced an envelope, handwritten on the front, in the large, careful letters of a child trying to be neat. Sophia. It's a card, Lily said. I can see that. Open it. Sophia opened it. The card inside was hand-drawn. On the cover, in crayon, 3 figures at a table, rounder heads this time, slightly better proportions, 1 year of artistic development visible in the rendering. The same 3 people, the same table. Yellow hair, brown hair pulled back, 2 bumps at the top for pigtails. Inside, in Lily's handwriting, careful and deliberate and slightly uneven. The way a child's handwriting is when they are concentrating very hard. Thank you for becoming part of our family. Happy birthday, Sophia. Love, Lily, and Dad. But he said I could sign for both of us. Sophia read it twice. Then she put the card flat on the table, very carefully, the way you put down something you don't want to drop. And she looked at the daisies on the cake, and she did not cry, but it was a near thing, the kind of near thing that you feel in your sinuses and the back of your throat and the specific place in your chest where things that matter live. Ethan's hand found hers on the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Lily was watching her with those dark eyes that still had that quality, the complete unguarded attention of someone who hasn't learned yet to look away from emotion. Are you sad? Lily asked. No, Sophia said. I'm the opposite of sad. Happy. Yeah, she looked at the card, the cake, the 2 people across from her. Yeah, exactly that. Ethan put a candle in the cake, a single one, same as last year. He lit it with the same lighter from his jacket pocket. She'd given him a new one for his birthday in August, but he still carried both. And the small flame stood straight in the still air of the bakery. Sophia looked at it. She thought about what she'd wished for a year ago. She'd wished she'd known it, driving home that night, for exactly what she'd gotten. Not in its specific details, she hadn't known the details, but in its essential shape, for the feeling of belonging somewhere, for the weight of a place in someone's world. She had that now. She had it so specifically and so fully that it was hard to remember what she'd thought she was losing when she'd lost everything else. She'd thought she was losing the substance of her life, the company, the status, the identity she'd built over a decade. She'd been losing those things. That part was real, but underneath them, in the place those things had been standing on, she'd found something that had always been there and that she had spent years being too busy to notice. She had not known herself, not fully. She'd known her ambitions, her capabilities, her tolerances, and her limits. She'd known how to work and how to win and how to manage the machinery of professional life with a high degree of competence. But she had not known, until she was sitting at a table in a bakery with $2 in her pocket and a candle in front of her and nowhere left to hide behind performance, what she actually needed. What would make the rest of it worth something? The candle burned. The flame was steady. She thought about the things she would tell herself, the version of herself who had stood in the parking lot that November night counting coins on her palm. She wouldn't tell her it was going to be okay, because that's not a sentence that helps anyone in the middle of not okay. And because the truth is more complicated and more valuable than that. What she would tell her is this: the thing you're losing is not the thing you think it is. The thing you're losing is the covering. What's underneath it is you. And you, it turns out, are more than the covering. She would tell her, the people who show up without a ledger are rare, and when they show up, you should let them, even when your entire self is organized around not needing anyone to show up. She would tell her, Lily is going to show you things about what it means to be seen by someone who doesn't know your resume and doesn't care, and it's going to feel more valuable than any endorsement you ever chased. She would tell her, the bottom is survivable. You survive it, and on the other side there is a table with mismatched chairs and a business you built with your own hands, and a man who took your hand on a walk and didn't make a speech about it, and a girl with uneven pigtails who kept your card in the pocket of a jacket she's been wearing for a year because she wanted to have it close. She blew the candle out. This time she knew what she'd wished for. She'd wished for another year of this. The specific, imperfect, daily difficulty, genuinely good thing that her life had become. That was all. That was everything. Lily clapped. Good one. You say that every time. Because you always do it good. Ethan cut the cake. The slices were still uneven. He had not, in a year, developed additional cake-cutting skill, which she found privately and completely endearing. Lily pointed out immediately that hers was smaller. The renegotiation was brief and principled. They ate. Later, after Lily had eaten her slice and three-quarters of Sophia's and conducted a comparative analysis of this year's cake versus last year's, the verdict being that last year's had slightly better frosting but this year's had better cake, which meant they were different kinds of perfect. And after the table had been cleared and they'd lingered over coffee the way people linger when they aren't ready to let an evening end, Ethan said quietly while Lily was in the bathroom, "I've been thinking about something." "Okay." He turned his coffee cup in his hands, a habit she'd catalogued months ago. He did it when he was deciding whether to say the thing he was thinking. "I've been thinking about what next year looks like. For the three of us." She waited. "My lease is up in March. And Lily she's been asking questions about how things work, about whether you're going to be there when she grows up." He looked at her. "She asked me last week if you were going to live with us someday." Sophia held very still. "What did you tell her?" she said. "I told her I didn't know, that it was something the grown-ups were still figuring out." He paused. "She said we should figure it out faster." Sophia laughed despite herself. "Of course she did." "She's not wrong," he said, quietly, without pressure, as a simple accounting. I'm not putting anything on the table tonight. I'm just telling you where my head is. That I'm thinking about next year as something we plan together, if that's what you want." She looked at him. The man who had fixed Mrs. Petrova's bathroom tile over 3 weekends, and had a paint stain on his cuff, and carried 2 lighters in his jacket, and had quietly, without announcement, referred 3 of her clients and not mentioned it for months because he didn't want her to feel a debt. The man who had taken her hand on a walk and kept it. The man whose daughter had signed a birthday card and Dad, but he said I could sign for both of us. "That's what I want," she said. He nodded. The nod of a person absorbing something significant without trying to appear like they are absorbing something significant. "Okay," he said. "That's it? Okay? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know, something." He looked at her for a moment, then, "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for about 6 months, which is too long, and I'm still not sure I have the right words, but..." He exhaled. "I think the best year of my life in a long time has been this year. The hardest parts of it have been hard, but having you in it has made me a better version of myself." And I think Lily would say the same thing if she had the vocabulary for it. He looked down at the coffee cup. "She actually said something close to it last week. She said Sophie makes everything more interesting, which is, that's the best thing anyone has ever said about me," Sophia said. He smiled, the full one, the one that changed his face more than he probably knew. "She meant it. I know she meant it. That's why it's the best thing." Lily came back from the bathroom, assessed the table, assessed the 2 adults, and apparently found the temperature of the room satisfactory. "Are you guys still talking?" she said. "We're finishing a conversation," Ethan said. "Is it a good one?" "Yeah," Sophia said. "Really good." Lily sat back down and looked at the remains of the birthday cake with the resigned expression of someone whose slice is gone and who is now making peace with that fact. "Can we come back next year," she said, "for your birthday, and do this again?" Sophia looked at her, at the dinosaur jacket, and the uneven pigtails, and the eyes that had been looking at her with that complete, uncomplicated warmth since the first night, since the moment in the bakery a year ago, when a child had walked across the room to a stranger and invited herself into her birthday because it had seemed to her, with the straight-line logic of 7 years old, like the obvious thing to do. "Yeah," Sophia said, "every year." Lily nodded, satisfied, the matter settled. She picked up her crayon from the table, she always had one, always, and opened the sketchbook she'd brought and began drawing something. Sophia watched her for a moment. Then she looked out the window at the November street. The same bakery window, the same dark blue of early winter nightfall that she'd sat inside of a year ago with $1.75 worth of coffee and a life she didn't yet know she was about to start. Everything outside looked the same. She was entirely different, not fixed, that wasn't the right word, and she'd given up on fixed as a destination because it implied a static endpoint, and she'd learned in this year that the people she most wanted to be like were not fixed but moving, always moving, adjusting to what each new thing cost them and what each new thing gave back. Ethan was like that. Lily was becoming like that, in the instinctive way children absorb the templates they're given. Sophia was learning to be like that. You lose things. Sometimes the loss is the result of someone's betrayal, and sometimes it's just the world doing what the world does, indifferent and unpredictable. You lose things, and you stand in a parking lot and count what's left, and find out whether you're the kind of person who can start from what's left, or whether you need a different amount to begin. Sophia had found out she could start from very little. She had found out that very little, handled right, was workable. And she had found out this was the part she hadn't expected, the part she would have found sentimental and vaguely suspect if someone had told her a year ago, that the people who show up in the middle of very little are the people worth building toward. Not the ones who arrive when you're already something, the ones who arrive when you're barely standing and decide to stay anyway. Those people are rare. They're the kind of rare that, if you're lucky enough to find it, you should recognize it before you're too proud or too afraid to hold on to it. She had been lucky. She had also been paying attention. She thought both things mattered. They walked out together into the November night. Lily went first, pushing through the door into the cold with characteristic lack of hesitation, exhaling a visible breath and finding this more exciting than it warranted. Ethan held the door. Sophia stepped through. The cold hit the same way it always did. Immediate, clarifying, the particular honesty of November air that doesn't negotiate. She zipped her coat. Beside her, Ethan turned up his collar. Lily had already walked to the edge of the curb and was looking up at the sky, which was doing something with clouds and city light that made it a deep orange-gray, the particular sky color of a winter night in a lit city. "It's a good sky," Lily announced. "Yeah," Ethan said. It was. It was not a spectacular sky, not a sky that demanded photography or superlatives. It was just a November sky doing what November skies do, ordinary and specific and present, and the three of them stood under it for a moment before moving. Sophia looked up at it, felt Ethan's hand find hers in the cold, felt the year behind her, and the year ahead, both of them real. Both of them uncertain in the ways that years are always uncertain, and found that she could hold both without flinching. This was the life she had. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd built and lost, not any version she'd have drawn up if someone had given her the paper and the time. This specific life, with its mismatched chairs and its wait list and its 8 employees and its Thursday evenings, and this man and this child and this ordinary sky. She had not imagined it. She had found it. There was a difference, and the difference was everything. Lily grabbed both of their hands simultaneously, one in each of hers, with her characteristic absence of ceremony, and started walking toward the car. The three of them walked. The city moved around them, indifferent and alive, the way cities always are, not interested in any individual story, not keeping score, just continuing. But inside that continuity, inside the ordinary noise and cold of a November night, 3 people walked down a sidewalk together, and the shape of them, the way they fit next to each other, the way they moved, looked, to anyone who might have been paying attention, like something that had been a long time arriving and intended to stay. Sophia thought, this is what it feels like to be exactly where you're supposed to be, not because everything has worked out, but because you know, with the specific certainty of someone who has stood in the other place, that this is real. That it is not a performance or a plan or a version of happiness you've constructed to present to the world. It is just this, just them, just the cold and the sky and the ordinary walk to the car, just everything.